basically they like laid 3 chairs out in a row in front of me, and it was a new house that had like windows out onto the street, and we only just moved, so we didn't have any curtains or anything, so people were walking past, and they had the big electric light on as they were doing this as well. And I didn't realize at the time that kind of what they were doing was actual torture techniques. Jehovah's Witnesses are ostensibly a Christian religion. They believe that the end of days is coming imminently. So they preach to warn people about the end of time coming. They believe that God's real name is Jehovah, which is why they're called Jehovah's Witnesses. And they go out on their preaching work to try and convert other people. But they have a number of beliefs that kind of set them apart from mainstream Christianity, and a number of kind of rules and regulations that they call principles that they live by. So, for instance, not only do members go out and preach from door to door, they also stand next to the carts. They didn't have those carts when I was growing up as a witness, but one of the things that most people know about them is that they don't celebrate Christmas, they don't celebrate birthdays, they don't celebrate Easter. In fact, they celebrate very little. The only thing that they kind of have as a celebration is remembering Christ's death, which they call the memorial. They also don't accept blood transfusions, which leaves members open to dying. A lot of people have died from not accepting blood. Members also don't vote. They're encouraged to be no part of the world. And this kind of encouragement to be no part of the world means that quite often they're encouraged to have limited education. If you do go to university, it's often to study something that's kind of vocational, so it would be to do something that's going to guarantee you a job at the end of it. Kind of arts, humanities, philosophy, all of that is kind of frowned upon. It's a very hierarchical religion as well, and I don't think I'd really realised how hierarchical it was and how patriarchal it is as well until I left and I was writing about it. And one journalist who read the book said it was like a real life Handmaid's Tale. And it really was very like that. Women are very tightly controlled. Only within the last few months have they been allowed to wear trousers to the meetings. It had to be that you wore skirts, and those skirts were expected to be a certain length. Women don't lead in worship. Only men lead in worship. They're called the elders. And they have a very tight control over the congregation. They also have a very strong say in who remains a witness. So if you go against any of their rules, you can be what they call disfellowshipped. You can be kicked out of the religion. There's also a lot of culture that you're cut off from. So for instance, you aren't supposed to read anything or watch anything or listen to anything that has what they call immorality in. So if there's sex, if there's swearing, if there's any of that, you're not to kind of partake of it. It's a very closed system. They also encourage you to not have friends outside the religion. The outside of the religion is called the world, and they call anyone outside worldly. So you're not to have worldly associates because they might damage you. So again, that creates a very isolated system and a very closed world. Also, you're not encouraged to be friends with your colleagues or really to know other people at work. So again, it means that people inside the religion really only mix with people inside the religion. So the ideas that you encounter are very limited as well. So it can be very strange to leave. It's a really kind of odd period of readjustment. So my mother converted, the rest of my family didn't. My mother was a single mum, and shortly after my father left, that's when she first encountered the witnesses. I was a baby at the time, and then she was baptised when I was about 2. So I really was all I knew growing up. I didn't remember. I think I had one Christmas. I don't think I ever had a birthday outside of the religion, so I didn't have kind of any clue how you celebrated birthdays or any idea how you celebrated Christmas. I wasn't allowed to go to friends' birthday parties. So it was like, really strange to kind of leave and readjust. My grandparents weren't witnesses, so that was kind of a little glimpse into another world, and that was actually really nice to have that. But my mother and my elder sister were witnesses, and it was all I knew. And I think she was really vulnerable. I think she was also looking for a way of making sense of the world. And I think that these kind of groups can offer, in their kind of black and white thinking, they can offer that idea of right and wrong. And I think when you've been really hurt by somebody, it can be much easier just to kind of see the black and whiteness of the world rather than look at the grey areas. And it stopped her having to try and think that out. I don't think that members deliberately target vulnerable people, but I think when you read between the lines of how we were encouraged to target people, there's definitely, it's vulnerable people who usually become what's called return visits. So you go back to them in the ministry. We used to, when I was young, take a lot of people's data without ever asking for it. So we would have books, like little notebooks that you took on the ministry, and you would write down if somebody had children, if they were single, if they were this, if they were that. And then you would tailor make your presentation when you went back with magazines for them. As a child, you're not really protected from the news. For instance, like I have children and I don't let them watch the news because they're children and the news can be really terrifying. But when I was young, it was that the news was kind of like cause for celebration. So anytime anything bad happened, it was this must be it. This must be the beginning of the end. And they have various signs that they interpret as being the beginning of the end. So it would be earthquakes, war, famine, political unrest. Basically, the way the world was always meant that it was about to come. It was nearly there. So as a child, I was really, really terrified. But I used to be told that I would have to like clear the dead from the streets, that would be one of my jobs. I used to also get told that my grandparents would die because they didn't believe in God, and that the rest of my mom's family would too. And I was terrified about having to see that and having to see their bodies too. So it was a really strange system to grow up within. It was also really difficult because I was meant to witness to people at school, but I didn't want to be the weird kid going in with the magazines, and I was supposed to give them to my teacher as well. But I didn't want to do it, but I felt a huge amount of guilt for not doing it as well. So I kind of grew up always feeling like I wasn't good enough because I wasn't quite doing what I was meant to do. But if I did do what I was meant to do, then I would be really odd and stand out too. So there was kind of quite a divide between kind of my true self and the other sense of self that I had very early on. I was a really anxious child, funnily enough. I used to have terrible nightmares. I had trouble sleeping, and the doctor advised that my mum played me story tapes to get me to sleep. And he obviously meant like children's books, but she would play me like the tapes from the Bible. And of course, it's full of horrible stories. So before I went to sleep, I would hear these awful stories, or we would listen to what's called My Book of Bible Stories, which is apparently a children's book. So I would listen to those before I went to sleep. I would have trouble getting to sleep. I would have really bad nightmares. And I had really sore tummies. And then when I was about 10, I developed migraines. So it was all these kind of psychosomatic things, but I think it was definitely because of what I was exposed to and what I was exposed to so young. And then I think I was about 11 when I was first diagnosed with clinical depression because I didn't have any friends. So I was understandably quite depressed. And then the eating disorder was kind of, I think, just like a combination of so much stuff that, you know, I really believe that trauma lives in the body and it has to find some way of getting itself out. And that was definitely, I think, the big thing. So for a long time, I prayed and wondered what was wrong with me because I would pray and nothing would work. Witnesses are very skeptical of psychiatric intervention, and I'm not surprised because psychiatrists are quite good at identifying problems and helping people figure out where the problems lie. My grandmother was a doctor, and she really pushed for me to see a psychiatrist. And I was lucky in that I did get outside help. But I was very wary of treatment, and I was very wary of letting it work. So it took a long time. It really took until I left the witnesses, I think, for me to feel that I'm much more recovered than I would have been otherwise. I definitely used the eating disorder as a way of kind of hiding from my thoughts as well, because I was so obsessed with food and calories and exercise and everything else that I didn't have to think about whether I believed what I was doing or not. And it was definitely like a thought-stopping mechanism as well. And then I didn't need it when I left in the same way that I needed it when I was a witness.
Hi, welcome to Deep.
This channel goes a level deeper.
Deep is a brand new YouTube channel that is dedicated to the amazing experiences of incredible individuals.
We basically try and answer the questions that you always want the answer to, but you don't feel like you can ask.
Myself and the team are responsible for a lot of the factual content that you might have seen on YouTube, Minutes With, The Gap, Agree to Disagree, among others. And we set up this new studio and this new channel to go a level deeper.
We will be uploading a new video every single week.
There'll be a wide range of stories, so please hit the subscribe bell.
Please let us know in the comments if there's anything you want us to cover, any stories that you've been interested in, any questions you wanted to ask.
We hope you enjoy. Now back to our story.
I never had thoughts when I was growing up, will I get married or not? It was just, I will get married because everyone around me was married. Also, you couldn't have sex if you didn't get married. So you're going to get married, and people get married young. I was ill for so long that it took up, like between 16 and 19, I was pretty much just very ill. And then I left home when I was 19, and I met a witness he was in his mid-20s at the time. And we got married when I was 21. But it never, the thought of being single and having a career and thinking what I wanted myself from life never occurred to me. So the husband is head of the family, which is something that you're told from very early on. You're told that the marriage arrangement, as they like to call it, mirrors the congregation. So the man is the head. And the woman is called the weaker vessel, which you're also told is something really nice, because that means that you're being looked after and you're being considered, despite the fact you're basically being told how weak you are. And you're encouraged not to be questioning and not to rock the boat, basically. It's also not a private affair. So you get married in a kingdom hall and an elder marries you. And it's very much that if there's any problems, the elders are involved from the beginning, essentially. But the elders are involved, like your whole life isn't private. I remember when I was little, my mum would ask because she didn't have a husband to tell her what to do, she would ask the elders up, and they would kind of get involved in pointing out how we should be behaving or what we should be doing. So nothing's ever really very private. They have a real kind of, I don't know what the word would be, like almost like a kind of tentacle, like reach into every family's business and every family's affairs, but all the more so when you're married. My husband was 5 years older than me, which was a fact that I was never allowed to forget. He was also obviously much more intelligent than me. He was much better educated than me. He had a better job than me. Again, these are all things that I wasn't ever able to forget. A difficult marriage, but again, I didn't realize it was a difficult marriage because it was very like all the marriages around me. And I still thought there was something wrong with me. So whenever I doubted anything within the witnesses, I thought, well, I'm only doubting this because there's something wrong with me. So I thought, well, I'm not good enough at being a wife. And I mean, I was 21. Like, what 21-year-old really knows what being a wife means? So yeah, it was always, oh, there's something wrong with me. There's something wrong with me. I was at university at the time, which had been frowned on anyway, that I went to university, and my studies were very much expected to kind of take a back seat. I was expected to keep the house immaculate. I had to have people up for dinner. I had to entertain. I had to be on the ministry. I was basically busy all the time, and then would like study in the evenings, the rare evenings that you have. Most of the evenings are kind of taken up with ministry and meetings. But yeah, my kind of uni studies, I was very much encouraged to sideline. And also I wasn't allowed to see anybody from university either. A lot of witnesses who don't have children, because they say the world is so bad, will defer having children until the new system, which I think is quite heartbreaking. So you have a lot of people who defer, well, they kind of defer their whole life. They talk about, in the new system, I will be, and they'll kind of list the profession that they would like to have now. It's like they've basically put their whole life on hold, waiting for God to come. And so a lot of people are childless. But I had a child. I was 24 when I became pregnant with my first child, and 25 when she was born. Having her was really the beginning of the end in a way. So she was a few days old when I was given a copy of a Bible storybook for her. And the person who gave it to me was so excited to give it to me. And I remember looking at it and thinking, I can't read this to the child. I cannot read this to her, because I knew that in it being read to me, I'd had so many nightmares and all these psychosomatic effects. I thought, I can't do it. But again, I thought there was something wrong with me, and I became very anxious. I had a lot of postnatal anxiety. But also I felt like being a mum was the first thing that I was actually quite good at. And so the first time in my life, I kind of had this feeling of being competent at something. And she kind of gave me a confidence that I hadn't had before as well. And I started, I think, to begin to be able to think. And I hadn't been very good at thinking before that. So something definitely kicked in when she was born. So what happened was I met somebody else. I met someone, and I had what the witnesses would call an affair. It wasn't much of an affair. Actually, in retrospect, was like, I should have done that a bit better. And then the elders came up to our house to talk to me. My husband asked the elders to come up, and they had what's called a Judicial Committee, which I didn't know they were coming for, but basically they like laid 3 chairs out in a row in front of me, and it was a new house that had like windows out onto the street, and we only just moved, so we didn't have any curtains or anything, so people were walking past, and they had the big electric light on as they were doing this as well. And they asked me really intimate questions about my marriage, about intimate questions about the other relationship, questions that I never thought I had the choice to not answer either. So I told them everything that they asked me. I saw them as kind of being men of God. And I didn't realize at the time that kind of what they were doing was actual torture techniques. My husband, who I had a difficult enough relationship with, was sitting on the sofa with me. And when I suggested that maybe he could leave the room, they said, no, he's your husband. He has to be allowed to stay. So it was really, really horrible. But again, I kind of submitted to it and didn't think that I had the choice to kick them out, basically, which I would do now quite happily. But that at the time, and they were there for hours. They were there till it was nearly midnight, and they sent me out the room before they came to their decision, and they basically said, oh, we've let you stay a witness, but with these caveats, I wasn't allowed to answer at the meetings anymore. I can't even remember if I wasn't allowed to go on the ministry. I think I was, but I kind of had to be like heavily guarded on the ministry. I had to study with an elder's wife. I basically had to just like be really humiliated. And they said when they came into the room, everything that happens in this room is private and between us. And then that Sunday, they had a talk at the meeting, what's called a public talk, and there was over 100 people there, where they basically told the whole congregation what had been going on. And they didn't name me, but it's a small community. Everybody knew who they were talking about. And at that time, I thought, oh, there's something wrong with me because I'm not humble enough to accept their loving discipline, as they called it. But over time, I just, and also, so my husband and I split up then. So I had a lot of time on my own and stopped going to the meetings as much. And with that time, I started to kind of write it down. And I'd always been scared to write things down, because kind of when you write the truth you write something, often the truth comes out. And as I wrote, I started to kind of figure out that maybe they weren't that great after all. Maybe they'd actually interfered with my marriage. They just interfered with my whole life. And then I went to a meeting in which the circuit overseer, so he's kind of like in charge of lots of congregations, and he got up and he actually misquoted the Bible while looking at me. And I knew my Bible. I'd been like really diligent at making sure I knew my Bible, and I knew he was misquoting this. And he said, God can never forgive anyone who's divorced. And I knew that wasn't even a witness teaching. And I thought, no. And so I just packed all my stuff up and left. And as I was leaving, I knew that was it. I was completely done, and I was never going back. Well, I suddenly found myself with all this time, and I didn't have a clue what to do with free time. I'd always been like programmed to fill my time full and to be busy, and suddenly it was just all gone. I also didn't have a clue who I was. I didn't know what I liked. All of my identity was built around my belief system. I didn't even really know what I liked to eat. So I used the time after I left, and it was horrible. I was brutally lonely. I was really lonely. I didn't know anybody. I remember walking around the city and thinking, like, I may as well live in the countryside. I may as well live somewhere really remote and isolated for all that I know people. I didn't have childhood friends. I didn't have uni friends. I didn't have anything really. But I used the time. I began to basically kind of binge on culture. I think I realized that culture was going to be my way into getting to know people, because that's basically the language we all speak. So I would just go and see anything at the cinema. I didn't care. I'd gone from sitting in the cinema terrified that there would be a sex scene and I would have to walk out because that's what you're meant to do, which is so embarrassing. I'd gone from that to I'll just go and watch whatever. I'll just take a punt, and I would just go to the art house cinema with a cup of coffee and just watch kind of whatever came on, and it was amazing. Suddenly able to watch whatever I wanted on TV. I would go to the secondhand bookshop, and whereas in the past I was worried about buying things secondhand because I was warned that there might be demons in them, and demons would get into the house and then would, I don't know, do demonic things to me. I could suddenly buy secondhand books and I could read whatever books I wanted. I also started working in music. So, because we'd been warned, as witnesses, you're warned that basically anyone artistic, anyone in the cultural industries, they're the worst. They're the really, really bad people. And I thought that sounds like quite a lot of fun. So I'll go and find out. So I met a lot of local musicians and local promoters and local people who weren't at all what I'd been warned they would be, but instead there were people who were really passionate about trying to create a community and essentially kind of trying to create the sort of life that I'd been taught to wait for, of waiting for the new system, waiting for being able to have hobbies, waiting for being able to enjoy yourself. And suddenly here was a group of committed, passionate people just building a good life for themselves, and people who were friends with each other. So my friendships until that point had always been conditional. It genuinely felt like I was born after I left the religion. And I kind of always think that life really began when I hit 30, and it was very difficult to begin with, and it was really hard. It's just been a joy to have left. It's genuinely amazing to be able to have a life that I think, well, this is my life and this is the life I chose, and it's the one that I've built for myself. They don't call it shunning in the religion. It's called disfellowshipping, but of course it is shunning. I think it's a way of them avoiding taking responsibility for what they encourage followers to do. My mum would describe it as her own choice, but she wouldn't see that that choice is influenced by videos that they put out, by magazines that they have, by their literature, and by the elders as well. She would also say that I've caused it to happen because I knew it was going to happen if I left, but I don't think you can live a lie and be an authentic person, so I couldn't stay a witness just so I could see my mum. And recently they kind of changed their rules a little bit, that they're allowed to talk to you if they're going to encourage you to return. But I wrote a book about the organisation, and I've been very publicly outspoken about leaving and about how I believe them to be a pretty nefarious organisation. So my mother hasn't been in contact with me because she'll know that there's no hope of bringing me back in. Last time I saw my mother was when my youngest was a baby, and that was at a family party. But I've not seen her I've not had a proper conversation with my mother since I was 32. So yeah, it's been a long time. If the definition of a charity is that it does some kind of public benefit, which is what you have to prove to operate as a charity, then it's very hard to argue that they are actually charitable in the effect that they have and in the aims that they have. I think their money situation is incredibly complex and possibly should have quite a lot more research done into it. Obviously, charities are tax exempt, and they have, I think it's 5 registered charities within the UK that they can actually just donate money between. So their money trail is really hard to properly get a grip of. I know that the Charity Commission have been looking into them since 2016, I think, and partly that investigation has taken so long because they've refused to comply with requests for information. They had to go to the High Court, and again, they refused to comply with that. So the leaders are very protective of the money. They're also very protective of their public face and their public identity as well, which is definitely a carefully crafted one. I think that more than anything, they are registered as a charity and they call themselves a religion, but I would definitely say that they're a business organisation masquerading as a religion. And the scale of abuse within the organisation is massive. After I published The Last Days, which doesn't have any child abuse in it because it didn't happen to me, so many people told me their own personal experiences, and I was shocked that it was child abuse that kept cropping up time and time and time again, and the elaborate cover-ups that they would go to as well, the lengths they would go to conceal the scale of the problem. I remember growing up and we would be told from the platform how awful the Catholic Church was, and of course the Catholic Church has a huge problem, but that was always held up as, this is what happens in other religions, and we're this loving religion, where all the children were encouraged to call the other members aunt and uncle, where we were encouraged to go on the ministry with people who we barely knew. We were constantly, as children, putting ourselves in really, really vulnerable situations. You were told that the elders were people who had to be listened to at all times. And of course, that creates a terrible power dynamic between an adult and a child as well. So I'm not surprised that they have a huge problem within the organisation. I don't want them to have a bad opinion of religion. I want them to form their own conclusions because I wasn't allowed to. So we have I would never say to them, God isn't real, for instance. I keep it very open. At home, I ask them, what do they think about God? How do they feel about God? Obviously, they're at school and they get told all different things and they're trying to reason it out and work it out. And I actually love seeing them try and form their own ideas about belief as well. It's really quite sweet. But I will tell them what happened in the past. So I'll tell them that I wasn't allowed birthdays or I wasn't allowed Christmas. I am awful at birthdays and Christmas. Their dad always laughs at me because I don't have a clue when to stop buying presents, and I don't know how to have a contained Christmas or a contained birthday. It's only been in the last couple of years that I haven't gone completely overboard. In fact, they used to hear the phrase, "Mommy's gone overboard," so many times that my youngest thought that I'd fallen off the Uber boat because she'd been told that Mommy's gone overboard. She told the teacher that I'd fallen off the boat at Christmas. I was like, no, sweetheart. But I will tell them age-appropriate stuff. And it was quite funny recently because I was telling my 10-year-old the things that I wasn't allowed to do. And he just stopped and he looked at me and he said, "Mommy, did you have any friends at school?" And I was like, well, not many. But yeah, I think they understand it a bit. I obviously don't want them to ever fully understand it or inhabit it, because then that would mean that they'd kind of taken too much of it on, I think. And I quite like them, knowing me as I am now. I don't want them to feel sorry for me or to see me as some kind of victim. I've told them that they're not allowed to read the book yet. There's an age limit, but there's an age limit across my work. So basically, they're not allowed to read Mummy's work till they're bigger. But they are quite interested in it. I am not religious at all. I think when I've seen the harm done by religion, I find it very hard to be religious in any form. I find belief fascinating. I find the idea of believing in something kind of so difficult to myself as a person that I find it quite beautiful when people do believe in things. I think I'm quite questioning, and I would describe myself as agnostic more than anything else, because I think, well, I can't prove God, but likewise I haven't been able to disprove God either. So I'm kind of in the middle when it comes to what I believe in. I think I would tell them not to be afraid. Don't be afraid of people who've left. That's one of the biggest things that you're warned against, is people who've left are bitter apostates, they get called, or mentally diseased as well. Don't be afraid. Everyone who's left has unpicked the belief system. They're not people who've lost their faith. They're people who have carefully examined their faith and found it wanting and had to build a life outside. I would genuinely say, don't be afraid of researching. Don't be afraid of finding out what the organisation's really like and what it really does. Go away and find out as much as you can, and then just go and live. Just go and throw yourselves into things. People are good. People outside are good people. I've found some incredible people who I spend my time with and share my life with. I feel incredibly lucky. I feel hugely fortunate. And life is waiting. It is absolutely out there. Just go and grasp it, basically.